Hey guys, in this video we're going to be talking about the beginnings of social development in humans, and we're going to be looking at things specifically related to parenting styles and what we call in psychology attachment styles or attachment theories. These are both related to parenting and the process of raising a young child. So, um, I have some other videos that I'll be posting related to this on Schoology, so just make sure you watch those as well as this one with our notes. So let's start with first really kind of setting the terms for social development. Right, this deals with our continued maturation process with others, both obviously starting with our parents and then expanding beyond that into our communities. Um, Social development is going to be something that we spend a lot of time talking about because there's some major theorists that fall under the social development umbrella. So this is really our last big chunk of things to talk about. So we did cognitive development already with Piaget and Vygotsky, and we've done some physiological development too, with both prenatally and relatively soon after birth, things like motor development, that type of stuff. So let's dive into social development. So a couple of things. You might have noticed that some babies don't like strangers or only want their parents. That stranger anxiety develops around 8 months of age. It's not something that we're born with, oddly enough. Why is my camera up here? It's not something we're born with, oddly enough. It's something that we develop as our schemas kind of coalesce, at least using Piaget's terms. Our schemas coalesce around the familiar, right? That these are people that are familiar to us, therefore they're the ones that we trust. That we learn to distrust others slightly in this first 8 months of age, and that leads to the stranger anxiety, where you might go to your little cousin or something like that to pick her up, and she might recoil away from you, right? That's nothing personal, at least it's potentially nothing personal. It's just that infants have this anxiety around meeting new people or seeing people that they haven't seen in a long time. But as they age and encounter others, right? This idea to recognize that we should be friendly to others, or at least not hostile towards, starts to take place, and then we kind of develop normally. Now, as we saw in class with some of those videos, this process really got started with Harry Harlow and his the rhesus monkeys that he used in his research. Right, so this is showing the difference between the wire mother that had the milk and the cloth mother that gave the comfort. And as we saw in those videos, the baby monkeys chose a vast majority of time, right? 22 hours a day, over 90% of the time in this situation with the cloth mother. And we saw that these animals went back to the cloth mother whenever they were startled or scared. That this was really, they acted like a normal, I guess a neurotypical monkey or primate would when looking for comfort from some sort of stressful situation or anxiety. They go to their moms. And in this case, they identify their mom as the one that is comforting, not the one that feeds them. So we watch those videos. I'm not going to spend too much more time here bumming everybody out talking about these baby monkeys. But this attachment, right? This is where this idea of attachment styles and attachment theory comes from. It has to do with how the caregiver, right, the parent. I don't like using. I try not to use the phrase mother and father all the time because it might not be. It's just really just the caregiver, right? There are alternate family arrangements and stuff like that. So I'm going to try. I try to use the phrase caregiver as opposed to parent, and you'll see that on the next slide here. So depending on the response of the caregiver, okay, and this is research that was done by a psychologist named Bowlby. She said that all infants, within the first year of life, attach to their caregivers. Usually, it's their parents, but again, it could be some other caregiver, and based on some sort of innate timeline of our neural development, that there's some sort of things that are going on, and this usually happens around the same time that mobility occurs. So crawling, walking, those things then start showing the stronger attachment, which makes sense, right? If you're out exploring the world, you want to have that like home base, that comfort to come back to. But the specific attachment behaviors vary depending on what I guess we can call the parenting style. So when the caregiver is both attentive and responsive to the infant's cues, so the baby's crying, it gets attention that it needs. It has a dirty diaper, for example, and it gets changed relatively quickly, right? That the caregiver is attentive and responsive to whatever cues the infant is giving, then that child is likely to grow up having what's called a secure attachment. Okay, the secure attachment is one where the child will explore playfully, especially in a new environment, as with the parent present or the caregiver present. Sorry, old habits. But when the caregiver is present, that secure attachment, they have that security that they can go out and explore a little bit, knowing that the caregiver is nearby. But if the caregiver were to leave, then the infant usually starts crying, and then is not able to be comforted by strangers. So there could be another person in the room. And this was all done based off of an experiment by Mary Ainsworth called and Bowlby called The Strange Situation, which I'm going to post a video on the Schoolgene. You should really watch that to get a sense of what's going on here. Basically, they put a baby in a room with their parent, and there's some toys. There's like a two-way mirror so that the psychologist can observe. At a certain point, a stranger comes in and sits in the room. The infant usually, depending on their attachment, either doesn't notice them, doesn't care about them. Maybe will try to play with them if the stranger tries to interact with the child, but is generally kind of wary. And then if the caregiver leaves, the child is inconsolable until the caregiver comes back. And then once the caregiver returns, the child has calmed down. That is a hallmark of what's called secure attachment, right? That the attachment is to the caregiver. They can't get that same comfort from a stranger. And they are able to explore freely because they have that security in their attachment with their caregiver. Now, on the other side, if the caregiver is intrusive or unresponsive, right? So too attentive, they're constantly butting in, they're making the decisions for the infant, they're, too involved, but then also unresponsive, right? They don't respond immediately to cues or those kinds of things. The child's likely to show what's called an anxious attachment, which is where the child, or ambivalent attachment, it's where the child is hesitant to explore even when the caregiver is in the room, right? So go back to that strange situation I described earlier. You've got these kids who won't explore this new room even with the caregiver present because they don't have that secure attachment. They're essentially, to use our language, worried that the caregiver is going to leave, right? Because they're unresponsive. So the child acts clingy. They're hanging on to the caregiver. And when the caregiver does leave, right, and they have that stranger in the room, the infant's easily comforted by the stranger, right? So this comfort when the parent or when the caregiver leaves the room is the anxiety and the distress is gone, no matter who comforts the child. Whereas that's very different from the secure attachment. If, on the other hand, the caregiver is inattentive and unresponsive, right? So they're not intrusive. They're just like, they're aloof. They're not responding really at all to the child's development or needs. Then the child develops what's called an avoidant attachment. This is where they are basically constantly keeping track of the parent or the caregiver in the room. So as the caregiver moves around the room, they're being followed by the infant, but not seeking contact. So they're not clingy as they are in the anxious or ambivalent attachment. And they also don't really show distress when the caregiver leaves. So they're left alone and the child's okay with it, right? This is a result, obviously, of the inattentive and unresponsive caregiver. So the child has essentially learned how to adapt to environments when their caregiver's not there. And what's really interesting about the avoidant attachment is while it looks like the child is kind of cool, right? Like they're just kind of like chilling. When they actually do things like heart rate monitors or checking cortisol levels in the blood, they both of those things come back as higher levels of stress among the infant who have this avoidant attachment. So it's not while it looks cool on the surface, and cool I mean just like not reacting, kind of just like just there. There actually is some internal like anxiety and stress that is related, which is very harmful to an infant. Um, so right, the goal, I think, if we're going to look at it in terms of parenting, the goal is to have this secure attachment, right? Is to be attentive to the needs of the child and responsive to those needs as well. Again, I mentioned Mary Ainsworth in the last uh, slide. She was the one who developed this strange situation, right, where she developed this um, uh, experimental design to show these different attachments, these weird situations. And again, there's a video posted on Schoology that you should watch to see what that looks like. Okay, now cultural variation and attachment styles. There are a lot of variation. There's a lot of variation in terms of the attachment styles that are prized in different countries and in different settings. So first up, you can see the data for the United States. About 2/3 of babies have a secure attachment. About 1 in 5 have an avoidant, and then somewhere around 15% or so have the anxious or ambivalent. This These proportions are different from other cultures because there's different norms and expectations for both infant development and parenting styles. So in Germany, you can see that there's a high level of secure attachment, which we would say is probably a good thing, but a higher level of avoidant. Remember, that comes from the aloof parent, right? The one who's not intrusive, who's inattentive and unresponsive, right? So you see a spike. So that's a common parenting style in Germany, right? Almost a third of the infants in Germany that were studied have an avoidant attachment. And then if you go even further to Japan, right, you see a higher spike for secure attachment, right, almost 70%, but also a very high spike in the anxious and ambivalent one. Remember, that is for the intrusive parents who are too involved, right? That leads to that. And again, that goes back to parenting styles. In Japan, preschool children are rarely separated from their parents, right? Like at all. Whereas in Western countries, in the United States, Germany, it's a little bit more common, to be left with a babysitter, or to be left, with an aunt or an uncle or something in the first few years of life. In Japan, that's very rare, right? So the infant doesn't really have they don't really ever get used to being left alone. So in these situations, in these experiments that are done, they show these anxious or ambivalent attachment styles. So again, it just shows different cultures, different attachment styles. Now, something that we should say, besides the avoidant one that shows the higher levels of stress, there's no real correlation between the attachment style of an infant and, say, later success in life. So there's not much of a connection between having a secure attachment at 1 year old and having an IQ of 130 or something like that, or being successful in high school, or whatever metric you want to use. That there's not a lot of data there. So I don't want to say at the end of the day that it's like no harm, no foul, but obviously secure attachment is better for the life of the infant. That can make things a little bit easier in the short run, which then can have the cascading effects to be just a little bit more independent earlier. Just kind of used to what's going on with the norms in a culture, right? They're developing normally. So again, this is just some similar data, again, back to what we were talking about before with the strange situation. Okay. So a couple other things, some other terms that you're going to need to know. And this deals with child rearing. So these are parenting styles, okay? They're not how the child is attached to the parent. They are how the parent raises the child, right? What actions does the parent take? Okay, and there's 3 that you really need to know. The first is the authoritarian parenting style. This is like a really strict The rules are the rules, and you have to follow the rules. There are no exceptions, no ifs, ands, or buts, my way or the highway kind of parenting. Think of an authoritarian ruler, right, who rules with an iron fist. These are the parenting style is the same way. Now, on the flip side, like the exact opposite end, is the permissive parent, the parent who just does whatever the kid wants, right? The parent who just lets the kid kind of call the shots, right? This is a parent who's pretty hands off at all ages of life, and just kind of gives into whatever the kid desires. And then there's the middle ground, right? The middle ground is called authoritative parenting. And don't confuse that with authoritarian parenting. People do it all the time, and it's very easy why. Authoritative parents are parents who are firm, but also understanding, right? So they say, hey, look, the rules are the rules, but hey, let's make an exception, right? There's something that came up. We have to adjust. This is okay. Hey, you've been showing a lot more maturity lately. Let me give you a little bit, a later curfew, or you can stay over your friend's house, or something that you can see responding to the needs of the kids, but not like relinquishing total control, right? So it's like the Goldilocks of the two. And in fact, authoritative parenting shows the best results in terms of outcomes for the children. Authoritative parents, the kids usually grow up resenting the parents. Permissive parents, they don't learn structure, and there's just kind of a negative effect from kind of being given in everything that you've ever wanted. So the authoritative parents is the more desirable. So going back to the attachment, right? There's a reason why these things are connected. Secure attachment can happen with any type of parenting style. Okay, these things are independent of each other. But authoritative parents have better outcomes for their kids because they understand the structure, right? You've probably heard this before. Kids need structure, but they also need to have their needs met, and parents need to be responsive to what their kids need. So that authoritative parenting is the goal, or at least should be the goal of most parents. You should reflect on that when you're writing your that part of your development paper or project. It's easy to impose the rules. It's easy to give in. It's a lot harder to have a firm line, but also be understanding and responsive. It's much more trickier, which is why it's difficult to do. All right, that's it for this video. Stay tuned for another video to talk about more social development later. All right, I will see you guys when I see you.